everyone, and welcome back to this channel, Day to Day Christians. Here we're going to have the third installment for the book of Exodus, the second book in the Bible. So far, we've gone through the establishment of this character, this person named Moses, who was saved miraculously by the same family, the royal family in Egypt, from being killed from the Pharaoh's command. At this point in time in Egypt, we have a Pharaoh who has no remorse for the Hebrew people and is actually afraid of them, and out of this fear has put them into slavery. And this person, Moses, came into his household and is a prince of Egypt and was gaining in his pity for his own people and trying to become a person for his people, and actually killed an Egyptian and had to flee and has started a family outside of Egypt in the Sinai. But although he's left and saved himself, the rest of his Hebrew people are still in torment and in ruthless slavery in Egypt, and were crying out to God for help, and God heard them. So this is the story as to what God does from the beginning to help his people in Egypt. So let's get into it. Here in chapter 3, we find out that Moses is shepherding one of the flocks from his father-in-law, Jethro. And he's doing it around a mountain which they call the Mountain of God, or Horeb. And it was here, while he was out there attending one of the flocks, that he saw in the distance on this mountain a bush catch fire, and an angel of the Lord appeared to him. And the bush was on fire, yet it wasn't being burnt, and it was staying just the way as it was. And the bush was on fire, yet it wasn't becoming consumed by the flames. So Moses sought out this bush and headed towards it. And as he got near, God called out to him. And one of the first things God said to Moses was, "Take off your shoes, for you are standing on holy ground." And then God states, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and of Jacob." And then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid of looking at God and being in the presence of him. And so chapter 3 and most of chapter 4 in Exodus is this conversation at the burning bush between God and Moses. After God presents himself, he tells Moses that he has heard the cries from Egypt, and he has come to deliver them and fulfill the promise that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, and rescue them out of Egypt and take them to the place filled with milk and honey, the land that was promised to them. And God says, "I will fulfill this promise and rescue my people from Egypt by sending you, Moses." And Moses says, "Who am I that can do this great deed and to deliver the people of Israel and stand up to Pharaoh?" And God says, "I will be with you all the way. And once you have fulfilled this, you will come back to this mountain and serve me, and then the people shall know that I sent you." Then Moses says to God, "If the people ask for the name of the God of our fathers, what shall I call you?" And then God says to Moses, "Say that I am who I am. Say this to my people, I am has sent you." All of these things that God has said so far are so important, but this last thing is super special and super important, because when you look in the New Testament, as when Jesus says who he is, he often replied to people by saying, "I am." So praise God for that. Here we have God stating that his name is I am to us, and Jesus claimed that he himself was I am. And it was that claim that he made to the high priests in Jerusalem that got him crucified. So a really interesting thing to take note right here in Exodus, a prophecy. So many prophecies already in this book, but that one super special to us. And so after telling Moses what to say to the elders of the Hebrews, he then goes about prophesying what is going to happen when Moses goes to Egypt. For God knows that when Moses goes up to Pharaoh and asks him to allow his people to go, the Israelites, that Pharaoh's heart is going to be hardened and he's not going to let this happen. And so God is already aware of the things he has to do and says to Moses that he will show Pharaoh his wonders and his might so that he will allow his people to leave Egypt. And that by the end of it, his people will plunder the Egyptians and take with them great wealth. And then in chapter 4, it goes on that God shows Moses what to do to present himself as God's servant to rescue his people out of Egypt. Moses here states, "What can I do to convince these people that you have sent me?" One of the things God shows him that he can do is that his shepherd staff that he takes with him to shepherd the herds, throw it on the ground and that it will become a serpent, a snake. The stick will become alive and turn into a snake. When Moses first saw this, he was afraid of the snake, but God said, "Stretch out your hands and grab the tail of the snake." And when he did so, it turned back into his staff. Another sign God gave Moses to show everyone that God had sent him is that God said to put his hand into his cloak. And then Moses did so and then removed it. And then his hand looked like the hand of a leper, of leprous, and that his hand was like snow. Then God told him to put his hand back inside the cloak. And then when Moses did so and then removed it again, he saw his hand was perfectly fine, just the way it was. And then the third thing that God told Moses he could do to present himself as God's chosen is to take some of the water from the Nile and put it on the dry earth, and that it will then turn to blood. And that will be something else he can show people to demonstrate that God has sent him. And then after all this, Moses still states, "I still can't do this. My mouth, my tongue, I can't speak properly." Apparently Moses has a speech impediment. And then God said this to Moses, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." And even after all this, Moses says and asks God, "Please send someone else." And then it states that God got angry. And then he spoke to Moses and said that if you can't speak, take with you your brother Aaron, and he shall speak for you. Now take with you the staff in which you shall do all of these things, and go. Now I think this is an awesome couple of chapters to read for yourself. Chapter 3 and 4, this conversation between Moses and God is such a crucial point in history and a crucial point in this man's life, Moses, who becomes an incredible witness and character and servant to God. Here we see this conversation going, God with this awesome presence that Moses is afraid of, and that is telling Moses all to do, all to say, giving him everything he could need, supporting him, lifting him up, giving these miraculous demonstrations in front of him. And still at every point, Moses is like, "I don't think I can do it. Please no. Can you send someone else?" And then finally God got angry, kind of like a father to his kid, and said, "No, go do what I've said. I've commanded this. You are my child. I shall give you everything you need. You don't know you can do this, but I do. Kind of shut up and go. I'm going to give you the power. Take this staff and take all the things I've just told you and go rescue my people from Egypt." Praise God. But you've got to imagine how Moses felt at that time. He just survived the escape from Egypt. He had this great little life set up for him there. Humble shepherd with this wife, his child. He was happy. He was content. And then his world was upside down. And God's like, "You got to go back there and you got to do probably the hardest thing anyone could do by that point in time. Go to the most powerful person on the planet and tell him that you got to let all of your slaves leave." Wow. But praise God that Moses ended up taking the message, believing in God, and went out to do it. And just before Moses left, God told him that the old Pharaoh, the old king, had died. So he didn't have to fear his wrath because it was a different Pharaoh now. And so Moses took his family, his wife with him, grabbed his staff, and then left. And while he was on the journey, God told him more about what he could say and prophesy in the future. And it's here in chapter 4, verse 21 onwards, that God gives the first prophecy to Moses and tells him to give this as a warning, that if Pharaoh doesn't do what he's asking, that God has come to save his firstborn son, Israel. And that if he doesn't allow that to happen, that God will take away the Pharaoh's firstborn son. And then God also sent a message to Aaron to go into the wilderness and meet up with Moses. And so they went off together. And at the end of chapter 4, we have here Aaron and Moses venturing into Egypt and meeting with the elders of the Hebrew people. And here, because Moses has this thing to do with his speech, he allows Aaron to say all and actually to do all of the miraculous things that God has commanded to be done and all God has commanded for them to say to his people. And the Hebrew people and the elders believed them and praised God that their cries and their groans had been heard. So there we have it, guys. God has finally started to intervene in this terrible situation the Hebrew people have themselves in. He's sending Moses and his brother Aaron to go in there to prophesy, to have with them the power of God, to do his wonders, and to ask Pharaoh to let his people go. Praise God. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. Send it to people that you know. And I'll hopefully see you in the next video where we go on from this story. God bless you, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.